Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Bay on K-Squid, KSQD Santa Cruz, community radio for the Monterey Bay area. I'm your host, Rachel Ann Goodman, and today on the program we have a special interview. We actually have two really special interviews. We're going to be talking about the sharing economy. What is it, how you can participate, and how it can make our world a whole lot better. In the second half, we'll be talking to members of the Amamutsan tribal band about a victory, saving Juristack. Juristack was property that was sacred to the Amamutsan tribal band and was slated for a giant gravel quarry. How did they stop it? What happened? We'll find out. Stay tuned. My first guest on the program is Tom Llewellyn. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
It's great to be having you here. You are the program director of Sharable, and Sharable is a big project that spans the globe. Tell us what it is and why it's important.
Yeah, so Sharable's been around since about 2009, and we were first formed with the idea of being the mouthpiece to talk about the rising sharing economy. And in the early days, back in 2009, it was pretty utopian ideas. I mean, just when Airbnb was getting started, it was before all the venture capital money came in, when the idea of people being able to share rides in their cars and make a little bit of money on the side as they were going from point A to point B made a whole lot of sense. And over time, instead of being kind of the boosters of the quote-unquote sharing economy, became to get a lot more critical. And wanted to make sure that we were uplifting, what truly was sharing, and rather than the kind of hyper-capitalistic market manipulation, extractive business models that a lot of the quote-unquote sharing economy businesses became. Like
Uber and Lyft and these things.
And all those, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so capitalism kind of warps this great idea into something wholly different than it was originally intended. So what's the alternative? A lot of people might be familiar with the sharing economy because they have little libraries in their block and people put books there and people take books out and maybe leave little treats. And during, these attacks in Minneapolis, people developed pantries that were free food on the spur of the moment. That seems like what a lot of us are familiar with, but it's much bigger than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, people have their different kind of entryway points to it. So like things like little free libraries, like you were saying. But really what it gets down to is, being a community, engaging with one's neighbor and finding means to do that, to share resources, to be a human, really. It's kind of how we've always acted. We're kind of tribal pack animals, and we, rely on each other to survive. And sharing resources is just part of that process, right? So, some of the things that I'm most excited about are projects that not only allow you to share resources with other people, but also allow you to share yourself, to find a sense of purpose, to be able to, figure out your place in your community and be fed by that project. Maybe food, like a free fridge, and there's networks of free fridges all over the country. There's really great guides on how to do that. And actually on Sharable, we've published about 350 different how-to guides on how to start community sharing projects, and creating a free pantry or free fridge is one of those how-to guides. And so, yeah, whatever the project is, whatever the way to be able to connect with other people and like I was saying, find a sense of purpose, that's really the kind of the root of what I would refer to as the real sharing economy.
So I'm familiar with community gardens, and you are probably also. We both share an interesting background that maybe people aren't aware of. But Tom Llewellyn is the younger brother of my childhood best friend who I grew up with in a place called Canyon. Canyon is hard to describe if you've never been there, but it's a small redwood canyon with alternative houses that were built by hand by many loving woodworking type of people. It was a retirement community in the 50s that later turned into a hippie kind of alternative community. It wasn't a commune as such. It had a public school, and a post office. Mm-hmm. And for most people, it was called the hidden city of Canyon because no one actually had any idea how to find it.
Yeah, I refer to it, and I didn't actually come up with this. Somebody else in town came up with it, but I like this framing of it, that it's a semi-autonomous, unintentional community.
I like that very much. We're going to go to a quick break and come right back because I think someone's desperately trying to get into the doorway. So we'll be right back. I want to tell you about this wonderful weekend thing we have going next Saturday. So I'm going to do that and quickly open that door. I'll be right with you. This is Talk of the Bay on K-Squid Community Radio.
Saturday, March 14th, it's Squid Fest, our annual concert and silent auction to benefit K-Squid. It's at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, 612 Ocean Street in Santa Cruz from 1 to 6 p.m. Celebrate our 7-year anniversary with performances by acoustic duo Dan and Laurel, the Puffball Collective, slacky guitar master George Kahumaku Jr., Western swing duo Poi Rogers, and Americana quartet Coast Ridge Ramblers. The auction includes instruments, festival tickets, local adventures, and all kinds of special goodies. We'd love to see you at Squid Fest West, March 14th from 1 to 6 at the Resource Center for Nonviolence. Tickets are available now at eventbrite.com or click the link on ksqd.org.
You know, I think K-Squid is really all part of that organic experience we had growing up. I remember the first communal thing I ever experienced with that was sharing economy. It was the building of a recycling center right at the top of the road. And I watched it come together, and then we used it, and people were crushing cans. It was really fun. And then we had road days where everybody would fix the road because the road was collectively owned. I remember a community sauna where comical things happened, so there were a lot of those things. And I just thought the whole world, I was 7 when I moved there. So I just thought the whole world was like that or should be.
I was say, I was born actually at home in Canyon. And so that was
in a geodesic dome, perhaps?
No, but definitely a handmade home,
yeah.
Up on the ridge. And, I have these really fond memories of those road days, of those work days. When I was 10 years old, I used to save my funky shoes every year, because I knew that paving day was coming up. And, as a youngster, I was out there with an asphalt rake with everybody else maintaining that road and getting to kind of see what it took to maintain like physical communal infrastructure, right? It is a process, but also to enjoy it. I mean, we rode our bikes on there. We rode go-karts down the road. We would hang out on the road in the middle of the night, at the hump where all of a sudden it got a little bit warmer when you got up the hill and there was this flat spot and you could look down the canyon, and we'd lay in the middle of the road because there was barely any traffic. And so that was kind of the experience of really like of commoning in action, right? Of like what it is to be a commoner, to be part of a place. And, at the same time, Canyon, like in many places in Northern California, was a logging town. And there was a boom and bust in the 1850s. They cut down every single last old growth. And, as a kid at the school, we would have class with the entire class with our feet dangling, sitting around the stumps, right? With our legs dangling in the middle. You could have 20 kids sitting in those stumps that were so big. I mean, the lore was that there was a stump that was so big it was a dance floor, right there in the middle of the East Bay. And so we also got to learn what happens when you are not intentional with your resource management, with, what happens when you don't think about the consequences, when you just take. And that juxtaposition of those two things of, knowing what not to do, but also getting this experience of that placemaking, of that maintaining the road and infrastructure. And there's also, most people live in the community are members of various water cooperatives that are around since 1908. This is before the hippie times, and we have our own community governance system out there. But those like kind of opposing forces being in that canyon was incredibly influential on the work now that I've done, not only in California but across the country and around the world.
Yeah, it's all part of one whole cloth, and that's how I feel when we were painting this place. I'm like, hey, reminds me of being in Canyon and having like painting day or road days. Things. I
mean, they're barn raisings, right? Yeah. I mean, it's again just like so natural to do that, to show up. I remember one of my older sisters, Jamina. I was having this hard time. I wanted to go hang out with my friends, but my room was a mess, and my parents wouldn't let me go clean, until play until I cleaned my room. And she was like, "Oh, why don't you just do a groovy?" And I was like, "A what?" She was like, "A groovy. Like, why don't you invite your friends to come over and help you clean your room, and then you can go over to your friend's house and help them clean their room." And I was like, "Dude, my friends are never going to come over and help me clean my room. Like, forget about it." But it's true. Like, it's so much easier to clean somebody else's dishes at their house, after a meal than to clean your own. And later, when I was in my early 20s and I was building a yurt and a little postage stamp home site, I was like, man, this is really a lot of work to do by myself. In fact, I can't do most of these things by myself, but I don't have money to pay anybody. And so I started calling up a bunch of my friends that were doing similar things all over the place. And I was like, "Hey, we should do groovies." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Well," and that's what we did. We had these roving work parties, on our little homesteads, and it made it work in a way that we couldn't have done it any other way. And, that really is like a true, real sharing economy. That's very relational. It is communal, and it doesn't necessarily matter what scale you're on. I mean, yes, it's easier in kind of rural, smaller places where you get to know folks, but in cities, you can do that as well. And so that's one of the things that we've done at Sharable, is to look at cities as platforms for sharing. And we did a conference in San Francisco back in 2011, which kicked off this international sharing cities movement. And at one point in time, there was over 110 cities that had a city-based sharing cities program. They had a program they're working on. We worked with Seoul, South Korea for a long time. They got the Gothenburg Sustainable Development Award because of their sharing cities program that we were consultants on. And so these kind of waves of communal-based sharing of people all over the place that had come to cities, that had found themselves separated from their neighbors, having this deep desire to build relationships, coming back together and figuring out, okay, what's the methodology to be able to help bring folks together? And it looks very different, in communities around the world. But the unifying thing is that people are building systems for connecting with each other over shared resources.
We saw a real ad hoc version of that in the coverage of what was happening in Minneapolis, that people, and also in Chicago, that each city that was under siege found a way to respond. Los Angeles is another. Respond to the moment, like, what can we do to help our neighbors? And they were learning as they went. They made it up. They had these whistles and that would warn people of ice coming. They had certain people bringing meals to people who were afraid to leave their homes. And it just evolved. There were roving, safety coalitions. And the reason I think those worked so well is people already knew their neighbors. They already had, because of the George Floyd uprisings and other experiences that they had in Minneapolis, they had a phone tree. We had a phone tree in Canyon. It reminded me of that. Like, your neighbors, you can call them up and say, hey, you want to join me in whatever idea.
There's signal groups. There's all sorts of things and it's a really great example of what I would refer to as disaster collectivism. Rebecca Solnit actually kind of first put that into words in her book, A Paradise Built in Hell, which looks at kind of how people respond to disasters collectively. And that's something that I've been really but very interested in, is the ways that disasters bring communities together and how communities are building collective resilience in the wake of these disasters. And it does root back to my experience of growing up in Canyon. We lived with, 200 people out in the woods. There were long-standing feuds of people not getting along because of the road, because of property lines, because of somebody's dog, because somebody shot somebody's dog, or somebody's dog bit their kid, or...
George Minji shot my raccoon. He actually did, but I only found out about this in my 40s, so I wasn't devastated, but it was very sad. It was attacking his rabbits. But anyway, yes.
But so, there's exactly. And, relationships gone bad and this and that, whatever it may be.
Funny stories that we could tell,
Yes.
like someone getting a chainsaw because they were jealous because somebody was hitting on their wife. So they cut down the posts on his house deck that fell down. And you probably know who that is. But that kind of thing.
All those things, right? That, I guess they maybe happen more in rural communities where there's a little bit more space for it, but maybe not. I don't know. But when there would be some sort of disaster, all of that stuff would melt away. And this happened. There was a major culvert that got blocked up, and it flooded the dip in the road, and nobody could get out, right? And so all of a sudden, everybody has to rally to figure out, how are we going to get this blockage out? Who's going to be able to go diving down underwater? How are we going to stop the person who's decided they're going to climb up the backside of the culvert and push it and pull their legs out of the thing? Whatever, the minor disasters that are stopped along the way.
So people put aside their feuds in order to work together.
Right? And it was so powerful. The same thing happened, one of our neighbors' houses caught on fire, and everybody came running, and we were putting out spot fires in the hillside that, the fire department wasn't going to get to. And
we had 2 fires when I was a kid. One was the house right below us, woke up with the flames right next to our bedroom. And the other one was up on the fire trail with manzanita, which is very hot.
Yep.
And it burned and burned, and we had to evacuate out a 1-lane road that only had one way in and one way out. And the fire trucks couldn't get in because everyone's trying to get out. It was very scary.
No.
So, I wish that we didn't have to have disasters to bring us all together, to work together as a community.
Well, we don't. I mean, I don't think that we do, right? Like we talked about, in Canyon and paving the roads and maintaining water systems and everything, right? And what happens, during these disasters is that people do find a sense of purpose, as I was talking about before, right? They kind of let go of biases and are able to kind of, for that moment in time, sometimes even experience a sense of joy.
You
right?
probably heard about what happened in Bonny Doon around the CZU fire. It was very much that way. There were these pods of people that formed, and you can argue that they were taking a big risk staying, but they saved hundreds of houses too. So we heard a lot of stories like that, that galvanized that community. And I remember being on the air here because that's what I could do. And a woman called and said, "I have 50 servings of soup. What do I do with it?" I said, "I'll call and I'll be right back." And she brought it to the Civic Center where they had stood up a shelter and served soup. So we were a convener and a collector of information, but also of helping people find ways to be useful, because you want to do something, right?
Yeah.
But you don't know what to do always.
Yeah, I mean, like during the pandemic, we had, all big fires all over California, right? And I remember that one day, I think it was in October. No, it was September. It was in September of I think 2020 was the day that wasn't.
The day of the orange sky?
Exactly.
Oh
the one where you couldn't see anywhere, right? And there were so many people that were experiencing anxiety, myself included. And during that time, a bunch of us got together at a distance, but shared materials, and we made all these DIY air filters, out of a box fan and an HVAC filter and duct tape around it and for $35, you could have a more effective air filter than you would pay a couple $100s for, right? Because it can bring so much. And we distributed 30 of those around to folks in the community, the people that weren't going to necessarily be able to afford or get out of their house to go get something. And all of a sudden, I felt this sense of calm because I was actually able to do something. And what we've, for the last, I want to say 5 or 6 years now, longer than 7 years, I've been documenting disasters around the world. And the thing that comes up over and over again is that when disasters happen, most people rise to the occasion most of the time. And we started this project called The Response to do these documentaries. We've done, I think, about 12 audio documentaries. We did a film about Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And we have an ongoing podcast series called The Response, engaging these conversations with folks that have gone through disasters like this. And what we have started to see is that there's a lot of the things that made it work so people could respond in an effective way was having strong bonds beforehand. Like you're saying, having a phone tree, having connections to people in the community, like we were seeing in Minneapolis, or having gone through shared struggle in some way, right? So in Puerto Rico, one of the things that really worked well, there was these amazing mutual aid centers that popped up, Centros de Apoyo Mutuos. And the reason why they were able to start so quickly and be so successful is that so many of the participants had been engaged in student strikes. When there was austerity measures that were going on, they had these previously formed networks that made it so that when outside disaster, an acute disaster happened, they were able to respond very quickly and effectively. And then the second thing is the importance of physical infrastructure to be able to support long-term response and recovery work, and to be able to think differently, within our communities coming out of those disasters. And one of the projects that I really love coming out of the CZU fire is in Boulder Creek, where they have a community tool shed that's opened about a year after the fires, I think in August of 2021. And, at first it was just open to folks that had lost their homes, understandably, to the CZU fire. And now it's open to anybody who lives in the San Lorenzo Valley to be able to access. It's open every Saturday. They've got large tools, wood splitters and concrete mixers and hedge trimmers and all sorts of things. And there's no cost to check those items out.
How does it run? Like, I want to reintroduce you because this is such a fascinating conversation. I neglected to do that earlier. This is Tom Llewellyn. He's program director for Sharable, which is doing all kinds of the things we were just talking about. How does the lending tool library work? Someone has to maintain them, I assume.
Yeah, so this one is maintained by or run by the Parks Department. And so they've got funding for it. They've been able to make it so that there's no cost to check items out. There's no membership fees or anything. But this is just one example of now thousands of libraries of things around the world. And this is actually one of the things that we spend a lot of our time at Sharable supporting, kind of the growth of this libraries of things field. The longest running tool library in the country was started in Berkeley. It's still running today. It was independent to begin with and now has been part of the Berkeley Public Library system since around 1990. And anybody who has a library card and lives in the city of Berkeley can check out. I think they got a couple thousand tools or something at this point in time. It's
there's
really
another
robust
idea that maybe people will take on that was happening in Europe, where it was an art library. You look at the art on your walls and you kind of get so used to it, you don't even see it anymore. So the idea was, really wonderful local artists would get paid to produce art. They'd put it in the library and people could check it out for a year at a time and then bring it back. And, it's not going to get harmed unless your house burns down. Yeah. So it's a cool idea, I thought.
Yeah, I like that. In Belgium, I was there last year doing some work with some of the organizers there. And they've got this system they call the baby takes. And their baby clothes and, side sleepers and camping equipment and carriers and all sorts of things. There are libraries of things for that. Also have no cost at all. There's, I think, a couple hundred of them throughout Belgium. So cool, right? And so it's a range of things. I mean, there's some with camping equipment, with cooking equipment, all sorts of things. And I was a co-founder of a tool library when I lived out in Asheville, North Carolina. And as we were getting started, I was really intentional about the items that we were going to have. Like, I wanted to have canning equipment. I wanted to have a massage table. I wanted to have sewing machines, and call it a tool library and kind of break down some of the kind of gendered concepts around tools. Like, people think, like kitchen equipment. Well, that's not a tool, right? Like, that's... And I was like, no. Like, we're going to have all those things. And these are all different types of tools. A community set of dishes is a tool. Right. And so, that's I kind of libraries of things are probably my favorite kind of physical infrastructure libraries. And, what's wild is we don't have one here in Santa Cruz.
Do you need like a place to host it, right? The physical space could be a big hurdle. We found this space through the County Office of Education. We needed a place for a community radio station, and we're so grateful they were able to rent this small space to us, and we engineered it in such a way that we fit in a pretty small space. So I'm wondering, is that a hurdle for people doing this?
Space is definitely a hurdle. I will say the one in Boulder Creek is built out of 3 shipping containers, and they just built a little facade on it, and they added it to a parking space they had up there on at the parks area, and so
Santa Cruz, if you're listening and you're one of these entrepreneurial community types, this is a great project for you, a sharing library of things.
Yeah, and I want to get involved in that too. So if there's people who want to contact me, tom@sharable.net, tom@sharable.net, let me know. And one of the things we've done at Sharable is that we have published a really comprehensive toolkit for starting a library of things. We are the fiscal sponsor, and we've been helping to develop the National Tool Library Alliance. And for the last few years, we've been kind of pulling together examples, bylaw agreements, membership tiers, like all these different things. And we created, 2 years ago, we created about a 100-page guide, plus all the templates and everything that goes along with it. And coming up in 3 weeks, actually less than that now, on March 19th, we're going to be releasing the 2nd edition, which is, we've doubled it in size in 2 years, right? This is growing so much. There's so many amazing resources. And so we've got the handbook basically for A to Z, starting a library of things. And shipping containers are one way. We've also developed a library of things in a public housing in Houston, Texas. And we're going to be launching a collab in May, and then another one in September for folks that are either housing developers or are doing community development that might be working with housing developers to build these libraries of things directly into the buildings. We also have a program that we're working with university campuses to get them on. We did a pilot at the University of North Florida in partnership with the Center for Biological Diversity, and we're working on replicating that nationally as well. And then, as we were talking about Boulder Creek and the community toolshed there, looking at kind of post-disaster areas. So we've worked with folks in Lahaina, in Hawaii, in Central Florida as well, to build libraries of things either in places where there have been disasters or that are regularly being impacted by disasters, and making sure there's the tools for response and recovery on hand.
I'm just reminded of the quote, which I'll probably quote poorly, but, never underestimate the power of a few creative people to create amazing things and make the world a better place. So it's much more gratifying, I would think, to do something like that makes the world better than to doom scroll your news all day, and maybe a more peaceful society will result after all. Well, it's been fascinating talking about this, and I look forward to hearing about the Santa Cruz library of things that comes out of this conversation. Maybe you'll get some phone calls. Tom Llewellyn is my guest, and we are here on Community Radio, K-Squid. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thanks for coming in. This has been fantastic and wonderful to get to know you as a neighbor as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just encourage folks to check out www.sharable.net, where we have all of our toolkits, over 4,500 stories about the ways that people are sharing resources around the world. And you can find new episodes of the Response podcast, which will be coming out later this month.
Great. We might even play one of them on the air.
Woohoo!
Yay. All right, Tom, have a wonderful day, and thank you for coming by.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.